Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending our webinar today, where we are going to discuss and debate AQR's Working Well Together Charter and the AQR Safety Guidance. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lucy Hobbs, and I'm a Senior Director at Box Clever Consulting, and I'm currently Chair of the AQR. So I'm looking forward to hearing more today about how the Working Well Together Charter and the Safety Guidance can really help Insight clients and us, their agency partners, work better and hopefully more constructively. From my own experience, understanding and mutual respect, combined with fantastic communication and transparency, are key to both creating and maintaining fantastic relationships, and therefore the best possible environment in which we can work positively together, hopefully to generate the best possible insight, which I know I am making sound very, very easy. But today we will hear more about how we can actually achieve this. So let me introduce my fellow panelists to you. So I'm joined by AQR Chair and Head of Customer Experience and Insight at View, Ruth Hinton, and Libby Eastwood, who is the Insight Lead at the UK Health Security Agency. I heard Libby and Ruth speak at Quirks earlier this year, and I was really enthused actually by what I heard about the potential of the Charter to really create a more supportive and ultimately a better way of working together, which in my very humble opinion is surely a win-win for all of us involved in Insight. Of course, as Insight practitioners and as qualitative researchers, we do have our own very distinct set of challenges as well. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Kirsten Bickelman from Yonder Consulting, who has helped the AQR create the safety guidance. And I'm just looking forward to her thoughts on how we can knit this together, working closely with AQR on the Working Well Together Charter. Kirsten's also going to share with us her perspective on how these initiatives really have the potential to make a difference for us who work on the front line of qualitative research. So please do use the chat function to raise any questions as we're going through our panel discussion. And at the end, we will discuss them and hopefully we'll find some answers as well to your questions. So on that note, I am going to hand over to Ruth, who's going to share the key principles of the Working Well Together Charter.
Great, thank you, Lucy, and thanks for having us here with the AQR. So AQR is the UK's biggest network exclusively for client-side researchers in the UK, and we've got a long-standing partnership with the AQR. It's always great to collaborate on content and ideas. So as Lucy said, I'm here to discuss the Working Well Together initiative from AQR. It's a voluntary code for clients, a declaration of mutual respect and empathy. Let me tell you a bit more about this with the help of a couple of slides, and then we'll discuss it with our fellow panelists. So let me just access that. Great. So the reason we created this initiative is that at AQR, we believe the way that we work together as clients and agencies can make a real difference to people's confidence and well-being. So the work that we do together, the research and insights work we do together, is valuable and important, and we can't promise to remove all of the stress and pressure that goes into that. But by collaborating and communicating differently and being a bit more intentional about those relationships, we think we can help to remove some of the unnecessary pressure and stress that goes into some of those processes, and help people connect with the purpose of the work, help to remove some of the waste and inefficiency by being more open to collaborating and communicating differently. So it's intended as a voluntary code that clients can follow and a reminder of the good things that we can do. Of course, sometimes, even if you're on the agency side, you might sometimes be in the position of a client, working with your subcontractors, working with your recruiters or other partners in the research process. So I'd invite you to reflect on how you could do this, even if you are on the agency side as well. So in terms of the charter, you can access it on the AQR website. Here's a QR code and this is the URL, and we'll pop this into the chat in a second as well. So here are 6 core principles. So the way this charter was developed was some AQR members discussed situations where stress and pressure occurs, and we reflected on those and also invited agency partners to tell us more about those examples as well. Those went into themes in the Working Well Together Report 1, which is available on the AQR website. And then we went back to our members again and said, so if those are the problems, what are the solutions? And how can we as clients commit to doing things differently to help resolve some of those? So we came up with these 6 principles. And when you read the charter, you'll see there are bullet points under each of these. So it gets quite pragmatic and quite directional about how you can bring this to life. And all of that was a careful consultation as well, because there are some things that are outside of our control, even as the client-side researchers in the project, but we're trying to focus on the bits that are within our control and can really make a difference. So principle 1 is when we ask you for a proposal, we'll respect your time. So we appreciate the time and effort that goes into these moments and how important that can be for the agency team. And there's a lot riding on it. And that's totally unhelpful if the brief you're given then changes, or if there are too many multiple options that massively amplify and multiply the amount of work that goes into those. So by respecting your time, we're saying we'll be clearer with the brief that we want you to answer to now. Maybe there might be other considerations later, but that's what we want the proposal to be about. And we'll respect your time during that process by letting you know about decisions. We heard about the awful circumstances where the deadline is 4 o'clock on a Friday, but you get someone's out of office and you'd race to deliver it to them, but they're not going to look at it for another 3 days. If only they'd given you those extra 3 days, that proposal could have been even better and caused less pressure on the agency side. So those are the sorts of things we're thinking about for principle 1. Principle 2, when we work with you, we'll commit to open and honest conversations at all times. And we hope by kind of stating this up front, or when we're setting up the relationship, or even when it's partway through, by saying we as clients are open to these conversations, we're saying we're open to you raising issues before they become a bigger problem. And we're open to adapting and collaborating to make the whole thing better. No one intends to do a bad job, but sometimes it just kind of happens accidentally, especially if the client team are under pressure from their stakeholders. But by committing to open and honest conversations, we're saying it's okay for you to raise these things with us. Again, we can't promise to solve everything, but hopefully by having open conversations, we can tackle more of that sooner before it becomes a bigger issue. Principle 3, we'll leave you to do your best work by managing our side of things well. We heard examples in the consultation of where the client is so eager, they are asking for interim debriefs. And in qualitative research especially, you need that thinking time. Otherwise, that interim isn't actually much use and it's putting too much pressure on it, where there needs to be time for that analysis, taking a step back, piecing things together. So by us trying to get too involved too early, we're perhaps interfering with you doing your best work. Managing our side of things well on the client side means things like managing our stakeholders. In the consultation and in report 1, we labeled them pesky stakeholders. There can be awkward people, there can be people that simply don't understand the process that we're working through, but it's our responsibility on the client side to take on some of that and to stand up for our agency team with some of that. Again, some of that will be beyond our control, but if we've been open and honest with you, maybe we can navigate that together. Principle number 4 is we'll treat you as an extended part of our team. And some of the clients who have already started using this charter have said this came with a little bit of a mindset shift. So if you really are part of our extended team, either for the project or as part of an ongoing relationship, we would communicate with you differently and we'd tell you different things. We'd give you a bit more context about what's going on in our office and in our team and with our stakeholders. We'd also keep you a bit more informed about what happens afterwards. And so this was a principle that made me reassess how I was working. And one of my agency teams did a great job last year on some research with families at the cinema. They did an intensive fieldwork period. They handed it over to us. And now whenever I see my marketing team have implemented something from that research, I bring it back to the agency team and said, do you remember we talked about this thing for little kids, or we talked about parents wanting to plan further ahead for half term? Well, here it is happening. And that feels really good to me as a client as well, because I feel like I'm then banking for myself that it's had an impact, but I'm sharing with the agency team as well what's gone on to happen with their research. That can help people feel a bit better. The aim here is to, help with well-being and mental health, and some of that is resilience and pride and connection with the emotion and the impact of what they're working on. But it's also a simple pragmatic thing that if I then want to follow up with that agency and do maybe a next wave of that research, they've come on the journey a little bit and they're not coming to it cold. So there can be practical benefits as well as well-being benefits to some of these things. Principle 5, will respect your right to disconnect. This is about the pressure to work out of hours, which sometimes is inevitable, especially in qual work, where the field work needs to happen when and where our respondents and participants are available. But there are scenarios where the client is sending emails and the agency isn't clear if that is urgent or not. And therefore, the agency partner feels like they might need to always be on tap and always available, just in case urgent requests come through. Or the client is sending information out of hours and the agency is not sure if a response is needed, but sometimes that's just the client or stakeholder working flexible time. So in the session where Libby joined me at Quirks and Lucy was in the audience for this, one of our colleagues, Nick, who used to work client side and is now an independent, he said he had a senior stakeholder who would get home, leave the office early, spend time with her kids and be back online in the evening. She would be sending requests. People heard those requests. She was really senior. She was like the marketing director. People heard those requests as being urgent and they would jump to it and ask their agencies to jump to it. And once they pointed out to her that this was the kind of waterfall or snowball effect of what she was doing, she realized, I didn't mean for you to respond to me straight away. I was doing it at a time that suited me. And she was causing all of this stress and pressure unwittingly. And it took someone to have the kind of guts to kind of go back to her and say, are you aware this is, is this what you intended? This is what's happening. And she was horrified and she was so glad someone had raised it with her. So hopefully there are stakeholders who are open to these open and honest conversations. And a slight tweak there is when she's not going to stop sending the emails at that time. That's what suits her to send her sent messages. But to flag, we can talk about this next week, or please can you respond to me tomorrow? That's about respecting your right to disconnect rather than assuming our agency partners are always going to be on tap, or even that blind spot of the agency thinking that they might need to be available all the time. And then principle 6, we'll commit to proper feedback. So the word proper is important. So actionable feedback in a timely way. We appreciate that the agency wants to hear what's going on, hear how to improve. We heard too many examples of ghosting. Lots of the client teams we've shown these principles to nod along and say, of course, these are sensible things to do. We should all be doing these things anyway. But we hear too often from our agency colleagues that some of this is happening. So we might have moved on as a client, but we need to kind of close the loop for our agencies. Otherwise, they're just left hanging and they may have other suppliers and partners who are also left hanging of what's going on with this project. So we commit to proper feedback. So that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of the principles at a high level. And now let's come to our panelists to talk about bringing these to life a little more. Libby, in your role at the UK Health Security Agency. That's right, isn't it? I always forget what
Yeah.
the S is. Thank you. So I know that when you heard about this, you embraced this with your team. You've helped us communicate this in a few forums now. And so if we dive into a couple of these principles, if we think about principle 2, when we work with you, we'll commit to open and honest conversations at all times. So how does this come to life for your team with your agency partners?
Yeah, so I'm at the Health Security Agency, and because of the nature of our work, often we need to commission work very rapidly. Sometimes not always, but because of that, we've got call-off contracts in place with agencies, which means that we work with them ongoing over a year, 2 years, which is really nice and means that this principle is very relevant to us because we have that ongoing relationship, and therefore being open and honest with our agencies means that we can really develop that relationship and work well together. So one of the things that we do is, as well as having the more formal contract review sessions, we also commit to having monthly, less formal catch-ups where we reflect on the work that's happened so far. And I really try and set the tone for those conversations being very two-way. So we welcome feedback on how the agencies feel it's going for them and what we've done well and less well, as well as obviously it being a chance for us to give feedback on projects and working with them more generally. So yeah,
Brilliant.
I think it's good to hear how we're doing, and we are trying to accept that constructive feedback and act on it so that we can get the most out of the relationships with our agencies.
Excellent, thank you. And I know you described a bit there, there's kind of special circumstances in how your organisation works with your agencies with these call-off contracts, as you say. But if we think about that as a principle of sometimes the research needs to be urgent, you're investing in that relationship and in the times when you do have a bit more time so that you've got kind of the room and capacity to do things more urgently. And I really liked what you said there as well about setting the tone for those conversations and making it clear it is two-way. We hope that there would be other clients that would do that in this way as well. Yeah, thank you. And then I also wanted to ask you about principle 3. We'll leave you to do your best work as an agency by managing our side of things well. So how do you work with your agencies in this way and help manage your side, and perhaps into principle 4 about how you treat your agencies as an extended part of your team?
Yeah, so this part of the charter is something that I feel like, having worked in an agency for much of my professional life, I could really see how much of a difference it makes when that's when a client is working with their internal stakeholders well and kind of resolving conflicts before it comes to you as an agency, making sure there's a single point of contact, and things like that. So I know the difference it can make. And I think it's something that we really try and put into practice now that I'm working on the client side. I think as a relatively new team, I think I still get to say that 2 years in, but we're also a relatively newly merged organisation. It's been a learning journey for us because we are forming relationships with our internal stakeholders, and some of them prefer to be more hands-on and some less hands-on with the research. So it's been a process for us to kind of figure out what that looks like and how we manage that, so it's not impacting too much on our agencies, and that they're really clear who is signing off on things and kind of what the way forward is for them, and they can just get on with things. So yeah, I think it's one area in particular where I found real value in being part of this charter and actually sharing stories with other people who've signed up to it about what that looks like, what challenges they might be facing in doing our side of things well, and how we can learn from each other to overcome that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And that's part of what Aura provides for us on the client side, these opportunities to share with people who really understand our job. So yeah, and then you having had the perspective of both sides as well is really helpful. We also had a conversation with some another Aura member and another agency colleague recently, and they were stressing the importance of positive reinforcement from their agency partners as well. And it can be difficult for agency partners to start to raise issues. Libby and her team have said they are open to this two-way conversation, but what if you're with a client who isn't quite there yet or hasn't made it clear? So then both our client side and our agency side said that they might focus on the other side of that equation instead and pick out the reinforcing the examples of when that really made a difference. Because then as a client, they start to hear that and go, that made a difference, that made a difference. Oh, they didn't mention it that time. You notice the absence of positive feedback, but you also move towards the things that the agency can do is really appreciating. So I think some of that empathy of thinking about what it's like on both sides, we can do that whether we've worked both sides or not. So yeah, thank you, Libby. That's really helpful. And I know you're sticking around if anyone has any questions to ask Libby about how her and her team approach this. And we're really grateful that the UK HSA are such a good advocate for this charter. Thank you. So turning to you, Kirsten, so in your role as an agency partner, I know when you heard about this, you were thinking about how this can make a difference and perhaps some recent projects where if it would have been in place, it could have made a difference. So do you want to share your thoughts and your perspective on how this can work well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think as a researcher, agency side, and as a quali, with a sort of general interest in human understanding and empathy, I just wanted to say that I think all of these are incredibly useful, and I think it sends such a great signal in the wider industry. I don't think I know a researcher who hasn't been caught out at some point by some of these principles maybe not being in place, and I think especially for less experienced team members and researchers, I think it can be really difficult to have those conversations with client organizations, or to even recognize if they're feeling something slightly out of kilter, to recognize if that's a valid feeling to have, and to even start that conversation. So I think it's a really important signal to send, and I think there's this really human element, right? On the agency side specifically, people don't want to let other people down. We all want to do well for our clients. But you're also scared of bad feedback, or maybe losing a contract, and then damaging the health of your company. So there's a lot of, I think, considerations that go through researchers' minds, thinking about client relationships. I think a few things that I've personally observed maybe over the last few years, I think in sort of coming out of the pandemic, two things. I think one of them is that sort of blurring of boundaries between work and home, and that proliferation of meetings. And I think that has led sometimes to a bit of a blurring of personal boundaries as well. So there are examples, across teams, where personal details need to be shared, for example, phone numbers, really late evening or sort of early morning calls because the day has just gotten too busy, and that's sort of being an expectation much easier because we just slide into that habit, I think, together. Sort of in our day-to-day. But I think that's also connected to, I think, the wider context and sort of these really heightened pressures on client organizations in terms of budgets, timings, teams shrinking, redundancies. And I think that blurring of boundaries and sort of the remit of the researcher, where suddenly we're sort of doing things that maybe previously we weren't expected to do, or we're not quite sure, what's happening, where did this conversation come from, very last minute requests, very understandable from a client side, as your examples were great, you feel under pressure from your stakeholders, you need to get this out. But I think from an agency side, I think in the relationship, it can lead to misunderstandings and sort of an erosion of trust if then you're not delivering to your best because you've been put under pressure. So I think, really incredibly useful and enlightening. I do have an example prepared where maybe this could have helped. Yeah.
Please, yeah.
Time. So this example, I've created this from a few different experiences, so it's not necessarily one person, but I think it reflects a few of these principles quite well. So the example sort of comes down of the impact of sort of a relationship between two people who are maybe not quite sure what the right processes are. So we have a combination of an associate director on the agency side, and then a sort of less experienced insight manager. Maybe it's an organization where there's not a fully developed insight function, and you have somebody who's just not as experienced working with agencies all the time. And we have sort of the start of a really big program that's very important for both sides of the coin. And we want to have a good start to this. So the AD is sort of in charge of one of the program elements. It's to kick off the program. But a lot of people are on holiday on the team, both on the client side and the agency side. You know, there has been a really positive kickoff call. Processes have been explained. You know, it's all gone really well so far. The AD wants to make a really good impression and sort of set the right tone with the relationship, delivers sort of recruitment questionnaires quite quickly, with sign-off timelines and sort of explaining, you know, what's necessary to sign this off, but doesn't hear back. Checks in a few times, doesn't hear back. And then on leaving the office on a Monday evening, gets an email from the client if they can call the person on their personal number. Sounds really urgent. Okay, so let's just do this. It sounds really urgent. Want to please my client here. They have the conversation. The inside manager is very stressed, quite concerned about selling this project further up into the CEO level. So are asking the AD to join a call with the CEO the next morning at 8 o'clock. So the AD feeling under pressure, thinking, oh, what should I do? You know, don't want to let anyone down, don't have anyone to check in with at this point either. So let's just do it. So they have the call in the morning, but of course things haven't been signed off. So long story short, the CEO did not enjoy this call very much, and gave some direct feedback to the AD on the call, sort of questioning their expertise and their credibility. So we're now here with the situation where, you know, really impactful on the AD, you know, trying to do everything right, but not really sure what's gone wrong, not really sure, feeling like they have let people down. They've now started a bad relationship here. You can also see the inside manager perspective. They probably didn't know the impact this was having on the other person, and they were just in a rush and, you know, also feeling under pressure. So I think there's a lot of things in here and a lot of things that could have gone better. And I think, you know, it also shows that domino effect of, you know, when we're losing one of these principles at the start of setting roles and responsibilities and being really clear about processes and remit of either side of the coin in the relationship, it has this domino effect on then other principles falling as well. And, you know, you can kind of see how the situation escalates. And I think it's a very human thing. I think we can all empathize with, and quite destructive, I think, for then, you know, the confidence of the people involved, and the relationship potentially into the future. So imagine we had these principles and applied them properly at the beginning of this project. So yeah, just to demonstrate really, I think, the positive impact that these principles can make.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think there's a couple of agency supporters raised to us that they felt like having these principles, and they kind of exist literally as like a card, as a document that you can bring to a meeting and kind of put on a table. An agency owner and founder said that when they're asked to step in a difficult relationship and try and rescue things, to have something objective like this to point to and say, let's use this as a framework for that conversation, could help with some of that rescue. So you're absolutely right, Kirsten. We wish those circumstances hadn't arisen in the beginning. But if you find yourself in this situation where you want to rescue something and the client hasn't already said they're working with the principles, fine, it may not have reached them yet. They might not be an AQR member, but hopefully this might be a tool to have a slightly different conversation, to go through what would we do differently next time? Can we reflect on that? And it sounds like in that sort of scenario, the insight manager wasn't really thinking of the AD as part of their extended team, or not in the same way that they might respect a colleague, like briefing them on the expectations of this call, going into it feeling like they were combined, rather than feeling like this is my agency partner that I get to wheel in and take care of a conversation for me. So yeah, I totally think, Kirsten, in those examples, a client who had these principles might approach it differently, or that call may still need to have happened, but there might have been a different kind of framing to it. Or maybe those difficult scenarios happen and we need to rescue it afterwards and learn and reflect, and maybe these principles can be brought out at that point. Great. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that, Kirsten. And you're absolutely right about the human side of this.
Mhm.
So Aura are on a mission to reach more clients and put these principles in the hands of more clients. So anyone on this call who isn't a client side, they can still play a role in helping us spread the word. And what we're hearing is that a lot of communication about frameworks and processes can be very dry. The human side can really help to bring it to life. So thank you for that contribution. We also wanted to touch on the AQR Safety Guidelines, Safety Guidance. So this is a document that you've been working on before, Kirsten, and I know there's going to be a build coming here as well. So do you want to tell us a bit about the role that this guidance can play and where it might go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, so we're at the AQR, of course, very concerned with the well-being of our members, about 2 years ago, I think, we've come together with a small group to develop the safety guidance for qualitative researchers. This really came off the back of the pandemic, restarting face-to-face fieldwork. Sort of the rules of the game sort of seem to have changed, and also I think a lot of junior researchers who just had no experience going into people's homes, or even to a facility, and do in-person research. So we felt at that point that it was really important to have some tools for people, some very, very clear, practical sort of guidelines to understand how can I keep myself safe when I'm conducting qualitative field work. So the focus was really the physical safety at this point. But we've come back together actually inspired by you and by these principles, because we now want to build on that. And I think mental health obviously is a really big topic. The client relationship management is a really big part of our job. And again, as I said, especially for more junior members of teams, that can be really difficult. So we're at the moment working on utilizing your principles and really building on what we already have and talking more about the emotional well-being sort of in our day-to-day work. I think in particular principles, I think it's 2, 3, and 4, they are very much about collaboration and that relationship. And I think that's really important. It's about, it's recognizing each other as a human, but also recognizing myself as a human and the sort of the rights to the feelings that I have. And I think those will be really useful to kind of build on that. And I think what it will do is, because it will be quite specific, and it will give them the tools essentially to take control over that situation, be a more active part of the conversation and that relationship. So yeah, I think that will be incredibly useful, and we'll keep you posted on how that goes.
Brilliant. And it's great to see how some of these initiatives build and overlap. So we at Aura just want to make a positive contribution on this topic, and we're very open to how things might evolve in the future. So it's great to see it's providing a bit of inspiration. Also, maybe it helps agencies feel like they can set boundaries, because we've had so many clients tell us that these are not unreasonable requests. These are the kind of basics of mutual respect and empathy, and so therefore an agency colleague should feel empowered to ask for some of this if it isn't happening. Thank you. So that was really helpful from an Aura perspective. I'm always learning and listening as well about where this might go. And you also made a really good point there, Kirsten, about younger and newer people who are learning. A lot of our clients said that this feels like a tool to teach their younger and newer client-side researchers, because no one teaches you how to be a client-side researcher. You kind of pick it up from the team around you, and hopefully this gives it a bit of a framework as well. So back to you, Lucy, and I guess to see if we've got any questions or comments from the audience.
I guess the only other thing that just struck me, Ruth, was how, as from an agency perspective, how we actually treat our partners. So our sort of recruitment partners, the independents that we work with sometimes on projects, these principles really apply there as well. So it just made me think, much of the principles there do equally apply to us when we have almost a client role ourselves. So it really made me think about, having all of those excellent channels of communication, making sure that we treat them as partners and not as faceless suppliers. So that whole point around, they are collaborators, I thought was really powerful. And it made me think about, the whole journey that we go on as well with our partners is really important. So it made me think, sometimes when we ask our recruitment partners to cost for a study, it takes them time. And do we always go back to them even and say, you know, thank you and acknowledge it? And, you know, if we don't win the project, do we explain to them, you know, why it was? You know, I think there's definitely a job to be done there. And I think just giving them constructive feedback as well, if they want it, spending time, you know, actually treating them as true members of the team is really important. So I think there's a job to be done there, and just taking them on that journey. I know often, you know, we get thank yous from our clients when we've done a great job, which is always wonderful to hear. But do we pass those thanks on, you know, to other people who've worked on the projects with us? So do we pass it on to the recruit teams and the independents? And even things like, you know, project outcomes. Do we share, you know, those great successes with everybody who's been engaged in the journey? So definitely lots of things to think about and evaluate just in terms of best practice in that context as well. So yeah, it made me think, you know, we've got a job to be done, haven't we, with our people who partner with us as well.
Yeah, great. That sounds really good. Thank you. And when we launched this, we're of course trying to reach clients, and lots of agencies heard us at Quirks and in lots of communication. You might have noticed Aura is quite active on LinkedIn, and lots of agency partners are saying, this is great. How can we help? One of the ways you can help is by role modeling these behaviors yourselves and training your own agency colleagues and newer and less experienced colleagues. Some of them will be the clients of the future as well as being able to go to your client and say, we are behaving in this way. We've seen benefits, you might like to as well. So it's that influence by role modeling as well that agencies can actively participate in order to still get that end game of changing clients as well.
Yeah, brilliant. So yes, I do have a few questions. I think this is one for you, Ruth. Do you think you will add any more principles to those 6 in the future?
We are open to that, but we're still at the phase of working with this. So there are lots of great initiatives that happen, especially when it's about the interface between different companies, where it's really good to move forward with a set of principles. And our next stage is, so we've been spending lots of time telling people about it and spreading the word. So we're grateful so many people have joined us today. The next stage is helping clients activate those principles and giving them tools and templates and best practice, and also some safe spaces to discuss it, because it's going to be a journey. We're not going to be perfect straight away. I literally helped to write these, and I've done some poor behaviors over the last few months when I've been under pressure. So it's a journey, and we've got to be open to saying that. So we think we're going to keep the principles as they are for a while, but we'll assess that next year and evolve it then. Rather than producing lots of documents, we've got one document, and now we're on to activation.
Brilliant. I guess another question along the same lines is, how are you planning to measure the effectiveness of the charter? So how will we know it's been a success and it's been engaged with and changing behaviours?
Yeah, so our inspiration at the very beginning of the process was we'd seen research across the UK research sector saying levels of poor mental health and stress were too high, and they were staying too high. They were over 80%. And despite a lot of initiatives happening and a lot of conversation, that figure had not come down. So we hope ultimately that if this is working, that figure should start to come down. It's going to be really hard to draw a direct line between this initiative and that, but as long as it persists, we still think we've got a job to do. We are gathering signatories of people who support the charter, both on the client and the agency side. So that list is growing, and that's been really insightful. Of course, we love a bit of data. The clients that are signing up in the form, you've got the option to say, am I signing up as an individual or on behalf of my team? And most people are saying they're signing up as an individual. And so that's inspiring our activation plan to say, if I'm a solo advocate in my insight team, how do we arm them with enough tools and templates that they can go to a team meeting and say, the charter exists and this is what we can do with it. And then another measure of success is the number of agencies who have said they want to sign up as supporters. That's a growing list as well. But the real success will be when I go into a room, like we were invited to the MRS People and Talent workshop, for example, a great work stream that's happening across lots of fronts to do with recruitment and retention and well-being and diversity and inclusion. And we talked about the Working Well Together Charter, and a lot of people in the room had already heard of it. And that was great. So it feels like our communication stage is reaching a really good level. We now want the activation stage. And I guess one of our main measures then is going to be going back to our members at some point next year and asking them for these tangible examples of how it's made a difference. So Libby, I think in your team, because you've embraced this, you've made some changes and you're starting to see some benefits, but it can take a while to translate into benefits even within your own organisation, right?
Exactly, yeah. Some of them are much easier to implement straight away and know that you're doing a good job on them from the get-go. And then others, you learn over time. And like you said, when you're under pressure, things can slip, and it's just about checking yourself and making sure that that happens less and less. So yeah, agree with that.
Right. And there's a question around the charter. Is it tough for, I guess, smaller businesses or independents or freelancers? Would it be tough for them to adopt it and maybe, use it proactively?
Yeah, I guess some of it comes down to what's within your control and what's outside of your control. So we had the example of an independent saying that their fieldwork agency, their fieldwork partners or their recruiters were chasing them for feedback, and the independent didn't have the feedback to give them. So they were aware that there wasn't any news coming down. But what you can still do in that is to still treat those subcontractors as part of your extended team and let them know there's no news and say, I'm frustrated too, and reassure them that you've been trying. So there's always some way that you can play your part in that chain. As a client, I'm an insight team of one. So at times I'm under a lot of pressure. There isn't anyone to delegate it to. There's no one to take care of it when I'm away on holiday. My agency partners absolutely have to be part of my extended team. So if anything, it makes the principles more important. But we are hearing from the bigger client side teams that they are thinking about how they make it a process and a habit, and how they can join together as a team to make sure they have moments and tools and templates. And some of them would have a member of the team who is allocated to best practice and kind of champions this and makes it live. We've had a lot of support from the Insight from the Insight Consultants Group, the ICG. They invited us to share this with their members, and some of their members helped us co-create it and are continuing on the journey with us and joining the volunteer team. They've invited us back to hear, to keep the conversation going and hear more about the client side pressures, because they feel like that's an important part of them understanding the difference that they can make. So it's kind of research about researchers. So I would say that if you are a small independent or micro business, there are going to be different pressures, but hopefully you can still enact some of these principles in your work and try and role model it and try and feed back to your clients and give them positive reinforcement, just as you would in a bigger agency.
It does make me think as well. I mean, this initiative can have such positive impacts on all of us across the food chain. I don't know if that's the right word. But I guess the more sort of stories we hear as well about where it's had a positive impact will really help to sort of build momentum as well. So the more sort of case studies and stories that we hear and that you can share where it's had positive impacts, I think would be really worthwhile.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important. If anyone does like what they've heard, if they sign up as a supporter, if they go to the Aura website, you can sign up as a client saying, I commit to living these, as Libby and I have. You can sign up as an agency supporter. And I know Lucy, one of your colleagues, has signed up as an agency supporter. That puts you on my distribution list, where we're going to come back to you regularly for help. So we've recently went back to all those supporters and said, today's webinar is happening. We were at the And More MRS conference, so please help us amplify these messages, but also make your own posts and share the word. And we'll come back to those agency supporters and say, can you share some positive examples? And then we've got those stories to tell. But because Aura is a team of volunteers, just as the AQR is a team of volunteers, this is why we need to make the process quite efficient, which is why signing up as a supporter is super helpful, because that's my distribution list and I'll go out with specific requests.
Yeah, I do have one last question. This is about being asked for very quick fire top line findings, particularly in this case from ad agencies who've always got super tight timings and timelines. They're happy to do this, usual disclaimers. Should we be open to this for practical reasons? And would you agree? So who'd like to answer that one?
So Kirsten, I don't know if you've been on the receiving end of that ever. Do you want to talk about your examples before I give an example?
A classic example. Yes, I mean, this happens frequently. I mean, I would say in light of what we've been talking about today, it's about the expectations attached to the outputs, and it's about having that open and honest conversation about, you know, what is feasible, what can you expect as an output, what is the extent of what we can deliver, and also managing expectations to a top line is always an unfinished piece of work. So I think it's very much about the relationship, and I think that happens much earlier on, you know, building trust particularly with ad agencies sort of early on in the process, and having those open and honest conversations, I think tends to help when it then comes to the stage of having to or being asked for a top line. So yeah, I think all of these principles apply very nicely there.
Yeah, and I think most of those ad agencies and clients will know a bit about their requirements up front, and they should share them. And I think most clients would be open to their agencies saying, can I check? Is this the sort of project where you're going to need these top lines? In which case, can we talk about how we deliver them well and do some of that preparation that Libby's team does with her partners, where they know the moments are going to happen really quickly, but they can all cope with that and kind of roll with that because they've established some ways of working and some principles, and they've done a little bit of preparation. So this came up as an example in our conversation at the And More conference, where one of our Aura members said, that sometimes happens, but when it happens, it should only be for the really important times. So we would like to avoid it as clients, but sometimes it's either that's, you know, the media schedule, that's the kind of project timing we're working to, or suddenly there's a senior stakeholder who asks a question. Both of those are good, important reasons. A bad reason is, I am disorganized, I didn't prepare in time, this has taken me by surprise, I'm pushing that pressure onto you. That should only happen a couple of times, and then you should learn and not do that to your agency again. So there might be a little bit about the journey of that client there, but the client should be explaining why they need this urgent work. You should feel part of something bigger. The reason we're asking for it is because it's going to inform these decisions. And again, the conversation we had last week was, therefore, you can be a bit more informed about what to deliver, and you're more likely to get it right first time if you're given a little bit more context. So if you're on the receiving end of that, I'd encourage you to ask your client a few questions and talk around what that requirement really is. If you're the client doing that, you should have foreseen it. And if you haven't, you should be being a little bit humble with your agency and treating them like an extended part of your team and say, I know this wasn't in the plan, we didn't foresee it, but here's why it's important. And then not cry wolf. You can't do that too often. You only do that for the important things. You can't be doing it for everything.
Yeah, and we've just got a few more last questions if we've just got time to squeeze these in. So one is around absolutely loving seeing this and a genuine shift in client agency relationships in the UK. Could be more challenging with global clients. So any suggestions on how to tackle that?
I wonder why it would be more challenging with global clients. Is that because of cultural differences in the way that work relationships work, or is it about the longer lead times and complexities involved there? I'm in an
time zones.
Right. Of course, yeah, that's a really
Yeah.
good shout. Yeah. So Aura has specifically decided to focus on the UK. As a group of volunteers, we needed to kind of have a strategic focus. We do have some international members, and some of them are embracing this as well. But yeah, it sounds like it's perhaps more about the complexities of those sorts of projects, which should perhaps take a little bit more planning, and a little bit more building those relationships over time. So I'm in an international role. I'm an insight team of one. Therefore, I keep going back to the same agencies because they've, like me, have learned some of my stakeholders. They've learned some of that shorthand. They've learned which style of German grammar to use. There's all of these things that help remove some of those complexities if you're moving through it as a team and you've kind of banked some of those learnings. But that's an interesting thought, and I will listen out for that amongst the members to see if there are particular international challenges where we can add a bit of value and share a bit of best practice.
Great, thanks, Ruth. And then just finally, this one from Emma. Love this, great framework working together in the future and providing guardrails for us and our suppliers too. We are seeing more and more ghosting after writing proposals. So do you have any practical tips or advice on how we should approach clients? Well, maybe we've asked them twice already what the status is of a proposal that we've spent lots of time, no doubt, labouring over. So I don't know, Libby or Ruth, do you want to answer this one? Maybe Libby, a good one for you.
That's a shame to hear because, yeah, like we said, I know how much work goes into writing proposals, and then when you don't hear back, it can be really demoralizing. There are sometimes restrictions from procurement teams on what you can say to agencies. So I would suggest to clients, if that's something holding you back from telling agencies the outcome, then working more closely with your procurement teams to talk through that process. And for example, if it's that a client doesn't know when they can declare the result to agencies, then working with your procurement teams to clarify that process and keeping agencies in the loop would make a real difference with that.
Even being transparent about that point would help.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I would just encourage, transparency if you can.
Yeah, and so then if agencies are thinking about how to approach their clients, they've tried it a couple of times and still got a no. The crux of all of this is kind of mutual respect and empathy. So you might try and imagine what might be the barriers for your client. Is it that they're embarrassed they don't know? Is it that they're juggling a whole load of other things? Is it that you haven't got the work and they're embarrassed to tell you, or they're trying to find a moment where they can explain that to you properly and give you some proper feedback? I wonder if you might want to think around it as to what might be the barrier for your client, and then sending them an email that's phrased a bit differently to say, we appreciate we might not have got this one. The reason I'm emailing you is because I've got some fieldwork suppliers hanging on and I could do with giving them a quick answer. That might be a way to kind of ask it differently and give the client an easier way to give you their answer. Or I appreciate we haven't heard and you must be juggling a lot of other projects, but I just wanted to check because, and then there might be a nudge you can give them that might help you get a slightly different answer.
I'll definitely use those next time, Ruth. Brilliant. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all very, very much. Thank you to our panelists for giving us your time today. It's been super, super interesting. Personally, I've taken lots of notes and I'm really excited to support it going forwards, both from my own sort of agency, but also from the AQR. So